poverty income. I'm back again, this time running for Senate, because we are in a crisis that needs to be remedied before it's too late. And it's a crisis that has come to a horrendous peak with the uncontrolled COVID pandemic and the unnecessary economic collapse that has afflicted us owing to criminally negligent political leadership. Now, the remedies that are available are remedies that should have been in place before we lurched into this catastrophe. And they involve perfecting our freedoms, because our Constitution has never articulated, has never advanced the household and social rights that we need to recognize and enforce if we are to be free at home and in society and be able to take care of our families, have economic independence, and participate equally in self-government. Now we are at a threshold, at a precipice, where our government has to respond to political failure, market failure, and an impending climatic crisis by taking bold action to ensure that we are all solvent, that we all have a roof over our heads, that we all have access to medical care, that we all have access to child care so that we can work as school is about to reopen, so that our schools have adequate resources to open safely and do remote teaching where necessary, and that we all have access to legal representation so that we can defend our rights. As I want to show, all of these measures can be realized, including a Green New Deal that will achieve 100% renewable energy by 2030 by completely simplifying our tax system, ending federal taxation on the bottom 90% of our population, and putting the entire tax burden on the top 10% and particularly the top 1% with highly graduated income and wealth taxes. This presents a new birth of freedom, which takes off our backs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. I want to make sure I don't miss anybody. I've got on my list Annette Davis Jackson. Annette, have you joined us? I know Brian is not gone. Is there any other candidate that may not have been on my list? I did get this at the last moment.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hey, Annette, we've never met before. Welcome to this forum. Republican Davis Jackson, 2 minutes to talk about yourself and to kind of introduce yourself and kind of lay out why you're running for Senate.
Wow, this is good. Well, Annette Davis Jackson is my name. I went to Spelman College right here in Georgia. And my first stint for really running for public office was I ran for United States Congress when I was 31. It was in 1994. I signed the Contract of America with Newt Gingrich. I also served 2 terms in the Georgia GOP, and I was a national delegate for George Bush Sr. And of course, I had security clearance at that time because David Schaefer was a young executive director. So we had really a good chairman and Alec Poinovit, and I had good mentors in the late Paul Coverdell, Matt Collins. So those level of congressmen were really wonderful. They did get the work done. So the reason that I'm running, because I saw across the whole state of Georgia that I want a polished Georgia. When I look through all Georgia, going from Savannah to North Georgia, I believe that we can do a better job. We can do a better job of just power washing everything, making sure that our roads, when you look up, you see the cement, it's quite dirty. And I don't like that because Georgia is such a beautiful town. It's an agricultural town. And then I came from Los Angeles, California. So I'm a tennis player and a golfer, and I'm a former college coach. So I believe in competitiveness. And the competitiveness, someone who's going to run for United States citizens, they have to really be a people person. And we have to, if we're number one in business, then we got to put more people into business. As far as education, the federal government is really not supposed to be involved in education. However, they do give money down to the state per head. The crisis that we're in right now, it doesn't have to be a crisis, but let me tell you, if we don't train all of our teachers on technology, because a lot of our teachers are really not trained in technology. So the federal level needs to have trainers who are in IT, who are amongst these corporations, so that we can build not only a manufacturing in America, but we can manufacture a better technology within our classroom. Our classrooms are antiquated, should I say. And the other reason that I'm running is because the Senate is responsible for landmark legislation. We have, Brown versus Board of Education, we got the Dred Scott, we have the Railroad Act. The Senate is supposed to be pushing landmark legislation to protect our Constitution. And not the Constitution where we know it. Everybody on this call needs to find the original Constitution. Because I find for Black Americans across the state of Georgia, they're really not too keen on Republicans, but we need to make them keen on Republicans because it doesn't say a Black American is 3/5 of a person. We need to read that Constitution. We need to read the Bill of Rights. We need to read the Declaration of Independence. And I'm not U.S. Senate candidate who's running to bring education to the whole state of Georgia for a polished Georgia.
You're muted again.
I am tempted to leave my mic on the whole time. Sorry, again, I should be used to this by now. Thank you so much. And I believe Brian, final candidate. Brian, your 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Raul. Again, my name is Brian Slowinski. Brian Slowinski. Brian Slowinski. Now, I'm the Libertarian Party endorsed candidate for this race. I've also been recommended by the Constitution Party. And I'm someone who wants to go to Washington, D.C., who would be an adult, who will actually work to find solutions to help us help ourselves. I believe in less government, more freedom. Those two things. Main thing. We have less government and more freedom. Everyone will be better off. And one thing that we can do as a country is if we really want to start changing Washington, D.C., we need to throw the bums out of D.C. Now, I set up these debates because I believe that everybody should have a voice, that we should have ballot access rules that allow anyone who wants to run for office, any party, to be on the ballot. So we have more choices. If we have more voices, we have more choices. And that's the reason why I set up these debates, because that way we can get our voices out. You can tell your friends about the live stream on Facebook and the YouTube one that's working. And hopefully we'll get some of the media partners who are going to be involved in this will also start picking it up. But I think that we as candidates, it comes upon us to spell out our differences between one another. What makes us a good candidate? What could make us a better candidate? I'm here to make everyone a better candidate, and hopefully put out there that I believe that I'm a strong candidate that would represent Georgia and someone who would be senatorial for Georgia. Thank you.
So from this point, right on 2 minutes, very good. So now we're going to do questions that are going to be between the candidates. And so each candidate will get to ask a question to another candidate. And let me pull up the timings here real quick. The timings are, I apologize, I thought I had this up here. Each candidate will ask a question in random order, and then the other person will be given a 2-minute response. And then from there, I'll ask questions after that. So we'll go in random order, and we'll start with John Fortune. Oh my goodness. John Fortune. John, who's your question for, sir?
Oh, it's not for everyone?
It's for everyone.
Oh, it is for everyone. I apologize. Question for everyone.
Okay, great. America has been a place where domestic terrorism has left certain populations in great fear. Really, since the passage of the 13th and 14th Amendments. The freedom that was promised in the Emancipation Proclamation was temporarily delivered and then taken away by Jim Crow. But after the gains of the 1960s with the passage of the Civil Rights Acts, domestic terrorism didn't go away. We had Timothy McVeigh, an avowed white supremacist, commit a terrorist act of blowing up the Oklahoma City Federal Building and killing over 300 people. And that sort of white supremacist domestic terrorism has not stopped in this country. And worse yet, we've had folks like Dylan Roof try and trigger a domestic terrorism acts after his church assassination of parishioners in a prayer meeting. And we have the commander-in-chief making speeches that taunt people of color. And what I'm asking is of my fellow candidates, do you support Donald Trump's calls to racism, domestic terrorism, and civil war, or do you stand against division and for unity of the American people?
We'll start with Alan Buckley.
Yeah, just a few things. That was a pretty long question. I think Timothy McVeigh was a terrorist, but not a white supremacist. I've never read anything of that effect. As far as Donald Trump, I'm not one who's going to vote for him. I encourage all of you to take a look at the Libertarian candidate, Jo Jorgensen. She has a lot of views that are similar to mine, not as in-depthly laid out, because I've spent 17 years thinking about this stuff. But yeah, Donald Trump, let me just say this. As I listed on my website, and I'm going to come out with a video soon, he's got good points and bad points. And the problem with our current Senator, Kelly Loeffler, is she's all on board with him with all of his points, good and bad. And one of his points that's bad is he does create this racial tension in the country, because he basically, there's a reason why he has his debates in Oklahoma City, and because he's preaching to basically white voters, period. I mean, I think some black people will vote for him, but not a huge number. And I think, he does do things that are just not designed to be creating a country which is unified in terms of race relations. So that's one of his negatives. And I've got about, 5 or 6 negatives and 5 or 6 positives. But, unlike Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins, who are both all in for Trump, I suggest that it would be better for the people of Georgia if we got a representative up there who would back someone like Trump or whoever the president is when they're doing good things, and then stand up to them when they're doing bad things. What's another bad thing that Trump does? Look at the debt. He couldn't care less. I mean, we ran $1 trillion deficit last year when we had a 50-year low unemployment rate. No excuse for that. I don't think he has any interest in protecting the environment. On his good side, he has cut back on regulation. That's a real positive. He has demanded more from NATO allies, that previous presidents had not done. And I do think he's picked some good judges. So I have a list of, like I said, 5 or 6 things that are pro and con as to him. But he is bad for race relations because he doesn't try to reach out to the whole populace. He aims at his, basic group of white people in these states that he thinks he's just running the numbers. He's thinking, how do I win this election? And so, he's got to get basically a very large percentage of the white vote, realizing he's not going to get many black people to vote for him. He's not going to get many Oriental people to vote for him. He's not going to get many Hispanic people to vote for him. But that's been a problem even before he was running for re-election. Of course, he's been running since day one of getting in the White House, from what I can tell. So, anyways, those are my thoughts on the matter.
Richard Dean Winfield, we'd love your thoughts on the question from John.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several dimensions to the threat of domestic terrorism and the way in which our national leadership, headed by Trump, has not done anything to aggressively address it, but rather seems to be at times encouraging it. And I think we have to recognize that what is happening in America is happening in many other developed nations. Namely, there is a rising fascist movement, which is affirming an anti-democratic nationalism, privileging some ethnic group, villainizing immigrants, and villainizing minorities. Now, all of our law enforcement agencies recognize that the prime domestic terrorist threat in America consists of none other than these fascist groups. And we have to have a leadership in the Justice Department and elsewhere, which is going to aggressively prosecute them. Because we're not just talking about issues of free speech. We're talking about organized conspiracies to violate the rights of others. And one aspect of this is the way in which our completely uncontrolled flooding of public spaces with guns is undermining our democracy. And we see this recently with armed stormtroopers going into public spaces, menacing those who want to exercise their political freedom. I faced something like that in the classroom at the University of Georgia because our legislature and governor has given in to the NRA's desire to have guns everywhere. So, I'm a philosopher. I have a bullseye on me because we push the limits in questioning everything. How can we have unconstrained debate when someone is packing heat in the classroom? And the same thing applies to public spaces. We can respect the Second Amendment and at the same time keep guns out of public spaces by restricting them to 4 places. In your home, in your car, unlocked and unloaded and locked, on firing ranges and on hunting grounds. But otherwise, we have to make our public spaces gun-free, and then we can have police on patrol no longer carry lethal weapons. Because when you speak about domestic terrorism and things like lynchings, today the number of people killed by police, and particularly African Americans, far exceeds the number of people who were lynched in any year in the 20th century. Now, also we have to tackle, to some degree, the underlying economic anxiety, which is fueling this anti-democratic nationalism. And we have to recognize that there is a problem with job insecurity that is now reaching crushing levels. And we have to be proactive. The market is failing. And we have to mobilize public resources to ensure that everyone's right to livelihood is respected.
Thank
And
you,
that will
Richard.
defeat this rise of a fascist fifth column.
Thank you, Richard. And on to Derek Grayson. Derek, we'd love to hear your thoughts on John's question, kind of a wide-ranging question that covered a few issues. Derek.
Sure, thank you. I was sitting here thinking, listening to these white guys, how much I wanted to hurl at their comments. I find them, forgive me for saying it and being so blunt, sickening. When I talk to people and I ask them, give me just one direct statement that Trump has made that shows him to be a racist or one who is deliberately attempting to create division, no one can do it. Then we talk about, I hear comments about domestic terrorism. Well, most of the terrorism that we have been experiencing as of late due to George Floyd has been because mayors and governors have refused to go and deal with the violence of those who did not want to protest peacefully, but who wanted to burn property and loot. And I've been around social media for a long time, and I scour all the time. I don't ever recall any of you complaining or down on the block talking about the numbers of black people that are killed by other black people. Chicago is damn near a war zone. We had a little girl get killed this weekend. We had one get killed the 4th of July weekend. Where were you guys? How many times did you post on your wall, rest in peace, or it's a shame what's going on in the black community? You want to sit back and make sound bites as though you care about what's going on in the black community. Where were your complaints when Bill Clinton and Joe Biden was passing the crime bill of 1994 that sent black people to prison in droves, making it a cash cow for private prisons, giving them the 3 strikes and you're out? Where were you guys then talking about the inequalities of the justice system? I don't recall seeing any of you. Yet you want to sit and talk about a man who has done more for the black man in the last 3 years than what I have seen from any other president, going all the way back to Bush Sr. The man has made it a priority to fund historically black colleges and universities. He didn't go into prison. He didn't get into office and wait till the end of the term to start pardoning people and setting people free that got unjust life sentences, whereas a white person might not have gotten that, because we know that that's not how the system has been working. The man gave us criminal justice reform. He brought about the lowest unemployment amongst blacks. I think the maximum number I heard was 40 years. So all of his accomplishments that he has done, and yet you sit and say he doesn't talk to black people. Well, what am I? What am I? Am I not a black man? Am I not? I'm 60 years old. I grew up in the hood. I know what goes on in my neighborhood, but I promise you, neither one of you don't know what goes on in the black community. And for you to sit and talk about racism, I really think you need to go somewhere, sit down, pick up a book, and then go into some of the prisons and do some volunteer work. Go to some of the churches and feed some of the homeless and talk to those people that are out there on the street. Go down and counsel people on what to do when they're about to be railroaded by our injustice system. But I don't see any of you doing that. You say Donald Trump doesn't speak to me when this man has been doing leaps and bounds in helping the black community. So I am going to regard your responses as insulting and ridiculous, and you ought to be ashamed of yourselves.
Thank you, Derek. Al Bartel, would love to hear your thoughts on John's question. Again, as I mentioned, kind of a wide-ranging question on issues. Al.
Well, this question was a good question. It points to that we are at a reference point in our nation where we get to choose between unity and division, and the kind of leadership that's going to arise that can provide leadership for unity rather than division. Domestic terrorism has been a major reference point for division in our nation. The domestic terrorism that has been levied by white supremacists is substantial. We've had white supremacists in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So now that we're at a precipice in our nation where we really get to choose about unity, the question becomes, where is that leadership for unity going to come from? And so as we look throughout the country, this U.S. Senate race, this special election, is one of the best opportunities for a unity message to arrive. This special election for U.S. Senate is going to be on the minds of everybody. It will be a runoff. It will put on display that with regard to Black America, the two major parties, one of them takes us for granted and the other one just takes us. So this U.S. Senate race being a special election where parties do not matter is the best opportunity currently for leadership that causes authentic unity to arise in this nation and move us forward as a unified nation. So that's my commitment to being in this U.S. Senate race. This U.S. Senate race could have a message that takes on domestic terrorism. This U.S. Senate race could have a message that decreases the influence of white supremacy in the nation. This U.S. Senate race could put Georgia on the map for having a leadership role in bringing about unity in our nation and our country. So it is critical for everybody to get involved in this U.S. Senate race, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer the question.
Thank you, Al. Next up, Annette. Would love to hear your thoughts on John's question. Again, it covered a few issues, including
I must admit, can you read the question again, please?
John,
I heard everybody.
Hey, John, I know it was a pretty long question that you had, John. Can you give kind of in a nutshell, again, kind of the basic question to throw to Annette here?
Right. Well, basically, Black Americans and people of color have not gotten a fair shake, though there were attempts to fix that in the 1960s. But white supremacists like Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who sold a white supremacist book at gun shows across the nation called the Turner Diaries, their bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City was a copycat crime from the pages of the Turner Diaries.
Right, John. So what would you like Annette to address? Domestic terrorism.
So I'd like her to address what she would want to do about domestic terrorism, and if she thinks President Trump is fanning the flames of white supremacy and domestic terrorism, and what her solution to this divide and conquer strategy of the presidents and the white supremacists. What is her solution to bringing America together?
Thank you. Go ahead, Annette. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes. Well, you know what? First of all, Americans and citizens have to love America. The Bible tells me that, you know, how can you talk a curse out of your mouth, right? And then you speak a blessing at the same time. It cancels out each other. So we have to go back to a loyalty oath amongst our citizens. You know, what I'm finding, even in this, what we call domestic terrorism, no, we have a group, and Black Lives Matter, who is going against America. I am for the Black Lives Matter. I'm all for it. Black Lives Matter, there's a different spin to it. And I don't really believe that the country of African American or people of color or people of Black descent really understand the operatives that are working. What is the solution? Every single person who is a citizen of America, whether they be naturalized or not, they really have to get to their God-given talent. Because to talk about white supremacy, my father, I grew up in a real estate brokerage. He gave me a cashier's check to take to historically Black college, Spelman College. I came here during the Wayne Williams murders, right? And I still don't believe all of that. Something else happened. There's more to that story that meets the eye. However, somebody asked me on Facebook, well, don't you feel disenfranchised? How could I feel disenfranchised as a woman, a Black woman who went to Spelman College, a father who was in real estate when he was 20. He didn't go to the draft because he was married with 2 children, who built his own real estate brokerage, and some of his friends from Omaha, Nebraska, which a lot of people don't think that there are Blacks in Omaha, Nebraska, but there are. So my dad came from Omaha, Nebraska with a great beginning to be in business. So everybody doesn't have that same soundbite of white supremacy. You know, to me, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, is doing an excellent job to protect America. He's about to get rid of the Federal Reserve. He pulled out the WHO. These are things that we need as America, because I'll guarantee you, that any country, if they could take over in America tomorrow, they would. Do we have to protect our borders? Yes. And if I had one committee that I would be on, it would be national security. We have to convince the American people that our national security is number one, because if we get rid of our freedom, we don't have anything. It's about our freedom, and we need to go back to the original Constitution in which our founding fathers made so that we can see that we're owners. People of color are owners, and I have a Native American background as well. So you have to look at the Native American background too and say, you know what, even though the land was stolen, hey, we have an opportunity to own land, but let's do it free and clear. And I'll tell you, my late father left all his land free and clear. So I come from a different auspices, and even if you grow up in a community where there is, you know, poverty, the one thing that I know, when you have a roof and you have clean clothes and food on the table, which the Black community was always good at putting food on the table because it fed all of America. Black America is the soul of America, and America has to understand that and start putting it in the history books.
Thank you so much, Annette. And final person to answer the question, Brian Selinsky.
All right, you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Brian. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, great question, John. Gets everybody thinking. We need to get some understanding in the situation as well. My campaign has always been about unity. It's one of the reasons why I put these debates together. It's one of the reasons why I went after the Libertarian Party endorsement as well as the Constitution Party endorsement, because I believe in unity, is that we need to come together and do what's best for the country. Same is true when it comes to race as well. I am worried about my children because, you know, I have children who are not white. I have 4 kids who are Chinese, and one who's Hispanic, and the other one who's a Mayan Indian. I also have a niece and nephew. My sister married a Black man, and I have a nephew who's my godchild. I worry about him when he's driving while Black, as well as my niece, as well as my Hispanic son, as well as my Mayan Indian son, as well as my daughters. So I come at it from a different perspective there, and I think we need to work together and stay away from this division of the white supremacy and those who support it. And I don't know if you remember or not, but the KKK was actually the political arm of the Democratic Party. And all these Jim Crow laws were supported by Southern Democrats during the late 1800s. So some of our first senators and representatives who were Black were Republicans. So we need to get back to that and learn our history, and we need to learn from each other and get back to do things that do not put the division upon us, but work on addition and multiplication. You know, I talk about these debates that I set up as power to the people squared. And what I mean by that is we all come together and we talk about different things, and our ideas fan out. Ideas we learn from each other. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And that wraps up our first round. Second round, we're going to have a question from Annette Davis Jackson. Annette, we'd love your question for all of the candidates that are joining you this evening. Just checking if Annette's with us. Okay, we will come back to Annette. Brian. Okay, then we'll come back to Annette. Derek Grayson, why don't you ask your question to go to all the candidates? Derek, we'd love to hear what you'd like all the other candidates to address this evening.
Sure. I guess my question is, you can go with a yes or no, and it's 2 parts. One, do you take the Bill of Rights as it is written? In other words, the Second Amendment, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed, or if we look at being safe within our persons and our homes, yet we see policemen and prosecutors getting no-knock search warrants from judges. So the question is, should the Bill of Rights be obeyed as they are written? Secondly, do you think you know better what the citizen needs to do for himself? Or do you feel that you need to be in the way with your leadership passing laws to guide them on the way in which they should go? That's my question.
Okay, that is Derek's question. We'll start this round of answers with Alan Buckley.
First off, you know, as to my last response, I don't believe Donald Trump is a racist. Just so you know, I never said anything like that. Never meant to lead anyone to believe that. But I do think he targets his audience to a specific group. And but in any event, getting to the question, I'm an attorney, and I absolutely believe in following the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I think that they are trampled on regularly. I do a lot of litigation against the federal government. I've had a case going on through various, actually, a matter that's been ongoing since 2011, through various cases fighting to prevent abuse of power by the federal government, in this case, a federal agency, the Treasury Department. And so my experience is that, you know, such as the Second Amendment, it is pretty clear. I do believe there should be exceptions, but only if the Second Amendment is amended to provide for exceptions. For example, if someone is involved in a domestic dispute with a spouse and one of the spouses is concerned for his or her life, they should be able to go to a judge and, in the right circumstances, be protected from the other spouse's use of a gun while they're in dispute. But that's not the way the Constitution reads. That's not the way the Second Amendment reads. So until that's amended, we need to follow the Second Amendment. Instead, we have the Brady Bill, which basically tramples all over the Second Amendment. A lot of the Brady Bill is logical. It's really a law now. It was called the Brady Bill before it was enacted after Reagan's shooting, the shooting of Reagan. But as far as the second part of your question, laws should exist just to protect people and their property and the environment. So most of the laws should exist at the state and local level of government. The federal government should mainly be involved in foreign relations. We have to deal with the tax system that's a mess. There is an important role that the federal judiciary plays. But the vast majority of laws should exist at the state and local level to protect people, their property, and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Brian Slawinski, I'd love to hear your answer to Derek's question talking about the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights.
Thank you for the question, Derek. Basically, on taking the Bill of Rights, yes, I believe in the Bill of Rights as written. I've been endorsed by the Constitution Party and the Libertarian Party, and they follow the Constitution. Now, do I know better than the other citizens? No, I don't. In fact, one of the things I've talked about is more freedom for people, less government, let people make their own decisions. So we need less taxes. I would get rid of the income tax and let people do more with their own money. Okay, we get less regulations. You know, we need to let the people in the states govern themselves because they know better what's for their individual circumstances, what they can do. We need to get back to Article 1, Section 8 and the enumerated powers and get the federal government back on its constitutional footing. It's gone very far and astray from that. That's what I would work on. I mean, obviously you have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but we need to do things and bring that back to the states and get it away from the federal level because it belongs on the state level. Thank you.
Al Bartel, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Derek's question related to specifically the Second Amendment, but also the Bill of Rights in general.
Sure, absolutely. Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and then the Bill of Rights, and in general, the Constitution. As written, it was written such that no one size fits all. No one law fits all. It is written to empower citizens as a key reference point for governance. So the different kinds of situations, such as the Constitution as written, that's why the Constitution established 3 branches of government, not 1. It's not just for the executive branch to dominate the conversation on the Bill of Rights or the Second Amendment. It's not just for the courts to dominate the conversation on the Second Amendment to bear arms or the Bill of Rights. It's not just for the executive or judicial or legislative branch. It's not the reference point of Congress to dominate the conversation. That's why we have 3 branches of government, so that the balance can be the deliverable. The balance can be the context for the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. It is accurate that government at times, as leadership, gets in the way of the true rights of citizens to act freely and governance of themselves. It is accurate that government passes laws, particularly in the area of public safety, which now confronts our nation, that those laws get in the way. So the dominant reference point is citizens as a key in the foreground. The background is the Constitution, and the lay of the land are all 3 branches of government. So the citizens now in this U.S. Senate race has an opportunity to exercise that right.
Thank you, Al. And hopefully Annette Davis Jackson, you're back with us. First, Annette, are you with us?
I'm with you, yes.
And did you hear Derek's question in reference to the Second Amendment and in general, the Bill of Rights?
Yes. First of all, yes, we ought to operate on the Bill of Rights because I'm an English major from Spelman College. And one thing that I did learn linguistics, words mean something. And I'll tell you, the writers of the Bill of Rights as well as the Declaration of Independence, let me tell you, brilliant. So brilliant, so brilliant. And then to answer the question about should we be impeding in citizens' lives, first of all, it's we the people in order to form a more perfect union. So we have to figure out how do we get to this perfect union. I already know we have to develop a blueprint. We have to develop a blueprint for the United States as far as American manufacturing, right? Because a lot of our pharmaceuticals are coming from China. A lot of stuff is coming from China. So we have to really scale back and look at our infrastructure as America and then design a blueprint for every state. And do I think that we should impede in citizens, in some of the things that citizens want to do? Yes, we do. And it's as an advocate. When you're an advocate, you speak those words that a citizen cannot speak because maybe they don't have the full facts in front of them. Maybe there is not as great as an understanding, or maybe they do understand. However, they just need a support system. And our citizens need support systems to understand a lot of the things that are going inside of America. And I'm a strong proponent. Georgia is a non-judicial state, right? As far as foreclosures are concerned, Georgia needs to be a judicial state because part of the problem that we're having is people are losing their homes, right? So that should be done at the federal level with regulatory agencies, the OCC, the Treasury Department, the Inspector General, the FBI. We have agencies that need to come down on these lawyers and these big foreclosure attorneys who are actually stealing people's homes. So yes, we should be involved in some of the things that citizens need. And in ending, she's from Georgia. Well, not originally, but she's from Georgia. And she had a case out in California. She was driving with a friend. She's a veteran. The police pulled her out of a car, and thank God we just won that police brutality case. So yes, citizens need to, and if I wasn't her advocate, we probably would have had problems, because sometimes other people can go in and speak to the judge, talk to the bailiffs, talk to the prosecutor. Through papering that case with Freedom of Information Acts and getting the body cams and everything, and then we asked for an anti-bribery form. When we asked for an anti-bribery form, that's when the prosecutors let go of that case. So citizens do need support. Yes, Derek, they do need support, but however, we don't need to trample over anybody's rights, because we have what is known in the original Constitution as unalienable rights, inalienable rights, not inalienable rights. Would somebody change that particular Constitution that we look at?
Thank you so much, Annette. And up next, John Fortin. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Derek Grayson's thoughts on the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights in general.
Great. Well, I generally support the Bill of Rights as interpreted, including the Second Amendment in general as interpreted. I do not support no-knock search warrants, which was a specific component. There must be an extreme circumstance for such a warrant to be issued, and those are rarely met when these warrants are issued, resulting in the deaths of folks like Breonna Taylor, which is completely an inappropriate situation. And I'd like to say that the Second Amendment does have restrictions on, as interpreted, in that we citizens are not supposed to deploy bombs on each other. This is a completely appropriate restriction. And there are circumstances where folks completely misuse technologies, and this has occurred once in Detroit in the case of someone known as the Radioactive Boy Scout, who actually initiated an uncontrolled radioactive reaction in a suburban neighborhood. So that sort of activity should be restricted. It certainly doesn't fall under our Second Amendment rights, nor other components of the Bill of Rights. And another part of Derek's question was, do you think the government knows better than the citizenry? Well, this really depends. And the citizens should be the government. I've been listening to citizens. People have been telling me their stories for my whole life. And I feel like I've been an unofficial priest. I've been hearing so many stories from the folks like those who've been incarcerated, like the folks that Mr. Grayson was talking about earlier. And but generally, the citizens should be the government. And thank you.
Thank you, John. The final person to address Derek Grayson's question on the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, I mean, the Second Amendment, first of all, specifically refers the right to have weapons in reference to state militia. And one of the worst Supreme Court decisions was that of Scalia, who ignored that connection and treated it as if it gave a kind of unlimited license to gun use and possession. But clearly, gun ownership and use has to be properly regulated. We all know that the greatest menace to gun owners are themselves, because 60% of the 40,000 killings by gun each year in the United States are suicides. Every day, 20 veterans shoot themselves to death. The greatest perpetrators of killing by gun of women are their partners who live in their home with guns. So we have to take seriously the menace to our society that unrestricted gun ownership and use represents. Now, the Bill of Rights as a whole is an important framework for enabling us to be free, because we can't be free unless we have rule both under law and by law. And, freedom is not doing as you please. That's a subjective freedom, because what you please is not necessarily going to conform to what others please. And it's going to involve a war of all against all. We need laws. We need rights to be articulated authoritatively in law. And after all, we're running to be senators, to be part of a lawmaking body that will be making laws for the nation. And indeed, there need to be national laws, because when we're dealing with rights, we're dealing with what truly unites us all. Rights are not privileges that pertain to just one group as opposed to another. They refer to prerogatives in which we all share. And indeed, if we can speak about any prerogatives that we all share, they need to be made federal law. And that's our job in running for the Senate. And we're there to be guardians of the freedom of our people.
That's right.
And the problem that we face as a nation is that we haven't paid attention to many of the rights that are crucial to live as a free person and as a free people. And I'm talking about the social rights, the family rights that are not to be found in our Constitution.
Thank
And
you.
our task is to make them into law and then to make them constitutional statutes as well.
Thank you so much, Richard. So that wraps up that round of questions. The next question for everybody is going to be asked by Alan Buckley. Alan, your question that you'd want to present to all the candidates here this evening.
Yes, I said in the last debate that I think the national debt is the greatest national problem. It threatens our nation's very existence. And on my website, I propose solutions to this problem that I think is tremendous. I've already summarized in the last debate and in my opening statement why I think it's a tremendous problem. In 2011, Admiral Mike Mullen, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that he had said many times that the national debt is our greatest national security threat. Then the total debt was about 15 trillion. Now it's approaching 27. So on my website, I propose solutions to the national debt problem, including a tax system that forces balanced budgets by using algebra. And I propose all sorts of spending cuts, including cutting the pay of federal employees until it is 10% below the average private sector comparable pay, because in general, with the exception of professionals, federal employees make 17% more than their private sector counterparts, and they have much more job security. Because that's from the CBO, not from me. So my question is specifically, is the national debt a very significant problem to the nation? And if not, why not? Hello?
Okay. Are you asking me in particular, or?
We're waiting on the moderator to key in.
Okay.
And it looks like his screen is frozen. And it looks like John's screen is frozen. So I guess it's now time for leadership. So Professor, you should go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think we have to recognize that to be a deficit hawk and to require a balanced budget or to require pay as you go is something that is catastrophically detrimental to a nation in general, and particularly when it's undergoing an economic crisis such as we are undergoing. Because now, instead of implementing austerity and cutting back public expenditures. We need to make public investments to enable us to get back to work, to provide the fundamental services we need, like housing and healthcare and education, and to be able to become productive. Every business needs to borrow money in order to be able to be competitive, because you always have to be developing new products, taking on infrastructure, overhead costs that cannot be paid for by the revenues of your current production. And the same thing applies to a nation. As we can keep the debt burden of our national debt under control by regulating interest rates, and above all, by making productive investments that add to our human capital and our own infrastructure. We can also increase our national debt for unproductive uses, such as by giving huge tax breaks to the rich, who are not going to use what they gain for productive investment, but are going to keep it in speculative investments that do not go back into the economy. So we don't have to be terrified about a deficit, but we have to make national investments in a productive manner.
So I apologize. I got kicked off the call for a moment. So I'm going to assume, Richard, you were the first person to answer Alan's question?
Yes.
Okay. So Ryan Selinsky, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Alan Buckley talking about the national debt.
All right. You hear me? There we go. All right. National debt is one of our biggest problems we have out there. Especially if you one of the first persons that really talked about our national debt was, I don't know if you remember or not, Ross Perot back in 1996. And a little feedback. You guys getting this?
No, it sounds good to me, man. Go ahead.
The national debt that Ross Perot talked about in 92 and 96, and talk about balancing budgets. And that's one of the reasons why the federal government did have a balanced budget in the 90s, because it got pushed by a third party. I believe, as a candidate who is a third party unity candidate who's been endorsed by the Libertarian Party and the Constitutional Party, I'm someone who can look at the debt and work on solutions to get us out of debt. Part of it is we spend too much, way too much, on stuff that's unconstitutional. We need to get back to our Constitution, that business plan that is out there, that was written by our forefathers and mothers. It's a great plan, but we've gotten away from it. Washington, D.C. have basically bastardized the Constitution. We need to get back to using that, get back to allow the states and the people to govern themselves. The closer government is to the people, the better it is for people. Thank you.
And I should correct myself. If I said 27 billion, I did mean 27 trillion for our national debt. Annette Davis Jackson, love to hear your thoughts on Alan Buckley talking about, and one of the things he mentions what Admiral Mullen talked about with, the national debt being the biggest national security concern. What are your concerns when it comes to the national debt? Brian, are we hearing Annette? I'm not hearing Annette at the moment. So Derek Grayson, Annette, we'll come back to you. Derek, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the national.
I'm right here.
Oh, here we go.
I'm sorry. I'm right here. I have to take myself off mute, so please forgive me. With the national debt, it is very, very important. It is the key to our national security, but also what President Trump is doing is, if he hasn't done it already, is to get rid of the Federal Reserve. What happened was when the United States of America went bankrupt in 1933, and it was even before then, maybe about 1928, when we entered into the Geneva Conference, that we substituted our mortgages in place and securitized it to make the dollar a lot more valuable, we suspended the gold standard, but it's still in place. So the United States of America, for our debt, we're going to have to institute, which I believe, and is one of my tenets for the United States Senate, is that we institute the gold standard. And for a solution to our national debt, I think you guys have looked at the Peterson Foundation. They have solutions, and there's a bunch of organizations, fiscal organizations who got together. I would implore you to take a look at the Peterson Foundation solutions. And the bottom line is we have to go across the curriculum for fiscal accountability and get with the experts of our country. We can solve this, but it's up to the fiscal agents in where we live. So it is very important. The good part about it is that the United States of America is the reserve currency to the world. So I have no doubt that we won't get this in line through instituting the gold standard and then taking our mortgages out so that our mortgages will not be securitized by Wall Street, thereby putting our citizens out of their homes.
Thank you so much, Annette. Now to Derek Grayson. Derek, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what Alan Buckley was talking about in reference to the debt.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Alan. That was a great one. And in hindsight, thank everybody else for their questions as well, and for participating in this debate. So I don't usually spend a lot of time on the national debt because I've come to realize that not even most politicians understand how our monetary system works. One, there is no fix for our current monetary system, given to us as the new form of slavery in 1913, because when the banks nearly failed in 1910, of which some did, they came together and decided now is the time to insulate ourselves from failure, and they gave us the central banking system. George Washington warned against it. Andrew Jackson stopped it. Lincoln went to greenbacks, not a central bank, for the war cause. And John F. Kennedy lamented about the central banking system. And what have we seen under Donald Trump? For the first time since its inception, we are getting money from the Federal Reserve at virtually 0% interest. Now, why do I say we can't fix it? Because every year there's not a Democrat in DC and only very few Republicans that vote against continuing resolutions, which are for the sole purposes. We are going to spend more money this year. We need to borrow more money from the Federal Reserve. Therefore, we're going to raise the debt limit, and we're going to borrow that money so we can spend more money. You can't balance a budget as long as you're spending, and those people in DC are not going to stop spending. The only way to cure this issue is to get rid of the central banking system. That is our only option, because as it is right now, if we were to not borrow for 1 year and to be able to pay the bill, because the money we collect on taxes simply just aren't enough, this economy would crash the very next day. And the closest that we have ever come to pulling the teeth of the Federal Reserve by not putting more debt on our necks is by the money we have borrowed as of late has been at virtually 0% interest. So the only solution for our national debt is to get rid of the central banking system. Kaput, kapui, get rid of the second slavery that came after the first one ended. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Al Bartel, would love to hear your thoughts on our nation's debt.
Sure, the national debt now is more of a gripping presence, possibly, than it's been at any other time in our nation. The national debt and the borrowing of that reference point was based on the economics of revenue and taxes and demand created a particular kind of crisis and a particular kind of public policy issue, but it was based on economics. But the debt issue that we have now, this unprecedented, is based on a public health pandemic. And the outcome or the unintended consequence of the public health pandemic has been the shutting down of the economy and increasing the national debt. The opportunity that becomes available is to begin to look at the balance between revenue and taxes. Given the current leadership model of government to borrow money against this pandemic, it has been almost impossible to look at the formula of the balance between revenue and taxes. The opportunity to bring balance to an economy and reduce a debt relies on the principles of small businesses and corporations. It is clear that we have to expand the footprint of small businesses in America and redesign the footprint of corporations. But doing that against this pandemic-driven debt is going to be difficult. Sooner or later, we will have to make the critical, hard decisions between a global economy and a national economy and the design of our small businesses and corporations on the citizens of America.
John, you're going to be the last person to answer the question and answer some of the thoughts that Alan Buckley laid out on our national debt. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Great. As your senator, I will be in the position that the Constitution has empowered Congress to create money. This is in the Constitution. However, in 1913, Congress handed off that power to the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking cartel with essentially the false label of federal. The Green Party has long recognized that Congress, however, still retains its constitutional power, and just with passage of a simple bill, we can legislate a win-win solution with the use of greenbacks, the same form of currency issued by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. I'm going to quote Sue Peters here. When the big banks refused to help the nation fight against its possible division in the Civil War, greenbacks came to the rescue. Greenbacks are debt-free government money created as an asset, not a debt, and today offer the safest alternative to getting the nation and the world out of debt, and through this and other crises. The hegemony of the global financial industry and its debt-based private for-profit money system must be replaced with a public money system in order to fund an effective response worldwide to COVID and the climate crisis. So legislation was written, vetted, and introduced in 2011 to replace the speculative Federal Reserve System with a reliable, stable value monetary system. The NEED Act, H.R. 2990 in the 112th Congress, was shelved by the Banking Committee at that time and remains ready to be reintroduced. And as your senator, I will reintroduce this bill with a new historically accurate header. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
This is Alan. Can I make a few comments in response to what I heard there?
Sure, really quick, and then we'll hit the next question.
The pandemic has very little to do with the debt problem. It's made it worse, yes, but the debts were going to spiral out of control in 2019 without the pandemic. It's just that we weren't ready for the pandemic financially. We had very low interest rates last year with a super economy. Why? Because Treasury rates follow the Fed rate. And if Treasury rates were normal last year, and we had a 5% average Treasury rate, over 25% of federal revenue would have been needed to pay debt interest. absolutely catastrophic. Someone said that President Trump has eliminated the Federal Reserve Bank. Was going to. He's not going to, and he hasn't. There's a difference between a deficit and the debt. The debt is the accumulated deficits over the years. Businesses fail because they have too much debt. That's why they fail. Lastly, I want to say I offer solutions to all these problems, not just talk about when I get in there, I'll come up with something. We need solutions now. That's the problem. We put these people in office who talk out of two sides of their mouth and then get up there and vote the party lines. And that's why we got to prevent Ms. Loeffler from being elected and Mr. Collins from getting in office. Thank you.
Al Bartel, your question for all the candidates. I'm going to try to pick it up a little because we're going to try to wrap up by 9 o'clock. Al Bartel, for all your fellow candidates, or your comment.
My question for the fellow candidates is how and what policy would you put in place to sustain small businesses, create small businesses, and expand small businesses as the backbone of the economy of America?
Brian Slowinski, you're first.
All right, you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm trying to mute myself to save us on some bandwidth. We're not going. So basically, well, I'll get back to what Mr. Buckley was talking about, the national debt. We need to make it easier for those who to borrow money. But one way that we could really, really help everyone in America is get rid of the Federal Reserve system that is currently being used. We need to go get back to our wealth money, as Ms. Jackson was talking about. We need to get back to like a gold standard, but actually we need to get back to what's called wealth money. Because right now, we are currently using fiat money. And the use of that fiat money, it makes our dollar worth less and less and less. If you look at the dollar bill, it says on the top of it, Federal Reserve note. We've gotten away from U.S. Treasury notes. Why? Because the fiat money system has taken over. With a fiat money system, we get ever increasing inflation, and our dollar is worth less and less and less. We need to change back to a wealth-based money system, and that will help all small businesses. That'll help them sustain because their dollars will be worth more. They'll be able to purchase more. They'll have more purchase power of their dollars, and they'll be able to create more jobs because of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, let's Annette Davis Jackson. Would you love to chime in on what you would do as a senator or what the federal government could do for small businesses?
How the federal government can do what? I'm sorry?
Supporting small businesses as Georgia's next U.S. senator.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, Georgia is #1 in business. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to go to our nonprofit organizations who are helping businesses. I was just a financial coach for United Way. United Way is one of the largest donor recipients, in the world. United Way needs to continue their programs. I just helped 2 micro-enterprise businesses scale up, a real estate business and an instructor business for restaurants, ServSafe. So ServSafe, you have to be ServSafe trained all around. So the key is to find out what businesses do we need. Particularly in the Black community, we don't really need any more fast food restaurants. We really need nice restaurants. We need a Mercedes-Benz. My favorite shoe is Ferragamo. We need a Ferragamo store. We need a Gucci store. We need to upscale just like Buckhead or just like Sandy Springs or just like Alpharetta. Because Black communities are rich as well. Hispanic communities are rich as well. So we have to move towards business and facade development and curb appeal. And that's what's key in commercial real estate. Commercial real estate thrives when everything looks good. So we have to find out what businesses are out there that could be a benefit to neighborhoods, that could be a benefit to communities. Because there's many franchises. I've heard of small businesses get with a franchise, and at first they weren't making the money and not making ends meet, but when they got with a franchise who had a prescribed model, and we have to get into prescribed models that work. that businessman was able to scale up and hire. The key is we can't have all these sole proprietorships. They are good, but we have to be able to scale up so that we can hire and so that we can build this enterprise. So that's what we need to do across the state of Georgia for small businesses. And more importantly, we have to put the farmers back in business the way that we know it should be, because, hey, food shortages are real. The truckers are working, and I applaud the truckers, but then we also need to be in the business of healthcare. We have managed care and not healthcare, so we really need that hypocritical oath. And I wrote another one for doctors. Doctors really need to take what they do in mind, because they need more training. We need more vitamin D. We need more minerals to combat coronavirus, combat colds, combat diabetes, combat, people having heart attacks. A lot of people don't take care of themselves. So we have a lot to do to strengthen businesses, but we have to have healthy people so the healthy people can run businesses, because you could be working 60 or 70 hours a week.
Thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
Next up, I'd love to hear from John. John, tell us your thoughts on what, as a Green Party candidate, you would do as senator to help small businesses in the U.S.
Great. Well, what small businesses need is customers with money in their pocket. And thus, we need to make certain that folks don't starve during this pandemic and have money to spend at small businesses. And so I'm proposing 2 different income support solutions. Our allies in Denmark and Canada are introducing solutions where workers who are unable to work during the crisis are being provided with up to 90% of their prior wages and salaries until they're able to return to work through government payments. Spain is introducing universal basic income. And the United States could and should implement a similar system to prevent a greater depression or worse. The United States is a far richer country than Denmark. And universal basic income will guarantee that every American has a share of our nation's enormous wealth, improve the quality of life for all Americans, and ensure that every American can afford basic food and shelter by paying a minimum guaranteed wage of $2,080 per month per adult and $350 per month for every child, regardless of health, employment, or marital status. When citizens have money in their pockets, they will be able to support small businesses, and small business owners whose model of a business like bars, which might not fit during the COVID crisis, they'll at least have money for food and shelter. So that's my solution, and thank you.
Thank you, John. And Derek Grayson, your thoughts on, as a senator, what you could do to help small businesses in Georgia?
Sure. 2 comments, though, I want to make in reference to what I heard earlier. One was Trump has not gotten rid of the Federal Reserve. And I often say to people, did you think he was going to come in and fix America in 2.5 or even 4 years? It took us 107 years to get to where we are today with our tax and debt system. Okay, so, take time to do a few things. And then I heard on my question about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Well, the issue wasn't about the 3 branches of government. The framework is already there. We simply have to obey it. And when there's a disagreement in that interpretation, that's why we have the courts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I just wanted to point that out for those that may be listening so that they understand they already have the instructions. They just need to follow them. As far as businesses go, there needs to be a delineation between the understanding of what a senator does at the federal level and what your state senators and representatives do at the state level. So I go to DC to represent the interests of the states. But as a senator, one thing that I can do, since the government stuck itself in education in 1979, thank you, Jimmy Carter, is bring back something new that he ended up taking out, like auto shop, wood shop, HVAC, all of that technical training that you could get in lieu of going to college back when I was in high school. STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Train up our students so that when they come out of high school, they can do what I do. I paid a lot of money to get a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science, but what I do, you don't need a college education to do that when it can be taught to you at the high school level. So this gives qualified bodies for small businesses here in the state of Georgia. Secondly, what can I do at the federal level? I can help to peel back federal legislations that impact small businesses at the state level, as well as taxes, to make being in business less restrictive. And thirdly, work with my state, because you see, people leave the state to go represent Georgia as a senator, but they really don't represent Georgia as a senator. They're up there doing the bidding of the 1%. But I would talk to the people here in this state. These are some of the things that you need to be thinking about doing to help small businesses. I know guys that cut grass and they got to get paid right then because they don't even have the necessary skills to accept even Cash App, which you can do on your phone. So these are the areas where you help the small business on how to do business in the first place and show them how to maintain business. And maybe there can be some programs to assist with small short-term loans, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is getting government out of the way, because many businesses fail because they simply don't have an understanding. And yes, there are some other inequities that need to be dealt with on who can get a loan and who can't get a loan. We want to make sure that the playing field is level, just as Donald Trump said with trade. We want trading to be fair and balanced. Well, we want everybody, if they have will and the desire to be a small business owner, make sure that they have what they need to be successful. That's what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek. Final person on this round, Richard Dean Winfield. Love to hear your thoughts on what can be done for small businesses as in reference to being a senator.
Yeah. Now, first of all, we have to recognize that small businesses are not and cannot be the backbone of the economy. And the facts show this. 82% of small businesses, according to the government's figures, have no employees. More than 95% of African American small businesses have no employees. All these so-called small businesses are actually piece workers selling some good or service, and they're barely getting by. Now, if we really want to help, and this also goes along with this fantasy that everyone can be an entrepreneur, competition requires firms to grow and consolidate. And that leads the economy to be filled with large firms with large numbers of employees, with far more employees than there are enterprises. Now, if we really want to allow business, big or small, to prosper, we have to do, I think, what John mentioned. We have to ensure that everyone else is solvent, that everyone has income to spend, that there is buying power. And that's perfectly obvious now as people try to reopen business, when people are not only scared of going back, but are flat broke. Well, I think the right path is not a universal basic income, which is just basic and depends upon there being people making a much bigger income to support those just on basic income. We rather need guaranteed jobs at fair wages, a federal job guarantee to eliminate unemployment. And we can then have equivalent replacement income for those who cannot work, who are either retired or on disability. And a fair income, according to the government's own figures, has to start at around $20 an hour in order to live in any American city. And it has to also be adjusted for inflation and the rise in productivity so that all boats rise with the tide of our national prosperity. Now, I think that in thinking about this also, we have to have healthcare taken off the backs of businesses. We have to separate health insurance from business, and we do that through Medicare for all. And we should also do that with regard to retirement pensions.
Richard, are you with us?
They should be separated.
Really?
Can I answer the question? I didn't get a chance to answer it.
I do apologize. Go ahead, real quick. Yes, Alan, I apologize. Wait,
That's all right.
why am I?
That's okay. I just left Wyoming, and the states compete for business. And for instance, in the area of LLCs, a lot of companies are going to Wyoming LLC. Why? Very little regulation, very little taxation. And the more we can push things down to the states, the better off we're going to be in terms of small business benefits. And one thing that Donald Trump has done well is reduce regulation, the opposite of what Barack Obama did. And reducing regulation with respect to small businesses will help them. The tax system, again, I've seen over the years how complex it is, and we just keep adding layer upon layer upon layer of complexity. It doesn't solve the problem, it just makes it worse. There are attempted carve-outs for small businesses in some areas. It doesn't work. It's still a complicated mess. And again, I propose simple solutions on my website, including a proposal that would bring back a lot of jobs to the U.S. by, as I said in the last debate, I propose a much simpler tax system where all corporations are S corporations. Income flows through, whether you're a foreign shareholder or a domestic shareholder. U.S. sales divided by worldwide sales is your U.S. profit, and that goes on your Schedule SE as self-employment income that's subject to a 2x rate. X is balances the budget. We have an X rate back that and a 2x rate FICA/SECA tax with 5 credits against the SECA tax to make the combined tax progressive. But you disallow deductions for payroll to the extent the U.S. payroll percentage is below the U.S. sales percentage. So if 20% of the payroll is in the U.S., but 80% of the sales are in the U.S., 80 minus 20 is 60. 60% of your payroll expenses are not deductible. So, and lastly, I just want to say we need to make healthcare costs significantly less. I propose market-based solutions on my website. An example is providing that patent life is cut in half if you charge more in the U.S. than you charge abroad. That comes from Art Gardner, a patent attorney. So,
Thank you so much, Alan. And again, I do apologize for missing you that round. Guys, we're trying to finish up these rounds of questions. We're probably not going to be getting to the questions that I have here. So, Annette Davis Jackson, your question for all of the candidates. Go ahead.
Hold on. Can you do me a great big favor? I sent the question to you. I am driving now. Can you give the question out? Do you still have it?
I do not. I don't know if you knew that there was a small change in moderator. So I was kind of brought in at the last moment. So unless Brian has it, I do not have your question.
Okay, Brian does have it. Brian does have it. And I do apologize for that.
That's all right. Brian, go ahead. You've got that question.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go off memory here because I'll take this off our feed if I go look for it. Basically, it is what qualities do you bring to the running for office? What leadership qualities do you bring that others don't that are currently in office or running for office? What makes you different from the other candidates, and why is your leadership different?
So, Brian, what makes you different? I'll just ask you.
I'm married to a German woman.
That's a good thing.
She's a colonel in the Army Reserve, so she keeps me straight. I have 8 children that we adopted, so we have kids, that we learn from all the time. I have children who are in college, children who are in high school, children who are in middle school, children who are in elementary school. And I think that gives me a different perspective. I'm running to make the United States better as a country, so it's around for a long time. The way I see it right now is it's pretty unsustainable, and we need someone who's not going to be a yes man or either the Democratic or Republican Party. I'm someone who will work towards unity, work towards solutions that are based on the Constitution, and work on getting us back to doing more work on the state and local level and back to the people taking care of themselves.
Hey, John, what makes you special and what makes you stand out?
Thank you.
John Fortune.
Thank you. So when I've observed wrongdoing in government, I have stood up and fought against the most powerful people in this state and other states who have tried to pull the wool over the eyes of Georgia. Back when Democrat Kathy Cox was the Secretary of State, she brought in an electronic voting system that many computer scientists warned her against bringing to the state. And I tried to reason with Kathy Cox. I met with her, and she was not interested in science-based solutions. And I have been tenacious in fighting for fair elections, paper ballot-based elections, elections that can't be rigged by someone with my ordinary computer skills. So not only in that arena of fighting for fair elections, and fighting then against Brian Kemp when he was trying to bring in crooked voting machines, and also against Brad Raffensperger, who brought in the same kind of machines that Kemp wanted. I have fought tenaciously and stood up for what is right, what is science-based, and what will produce a fair result. So I will continue to fight for our basic constitutional rights and for the American people. I've gone to DC and learned about dirty tricks pulled on federal legislation that was that brought these machines into Georgia. The Help America Vote Act. It should have been Help Computer Programmers Rig the Vote Act. I've learned how Republicans and Democrats have been played by certain members of the leadership in writing rotten bills. And I will use this knowledge to stand up against the lobbyists, against the special interests, and for the American people.
Thank you, John. Hey, Al Bartel, what makes you special? What are your special skills that you would bring to the U.S. Senate in representing Georgia?
My specialist and my skill base as a U.S. Senator allows for public policy activists and public engagement activists to be the cornerstones of 21st century leadership in America. Most of the candidates are either a public policy activist or a public engagement activist. In today's 21st century world of leadership, you have to do both. And to do that requires an incredible relationship with public interest data. You have to be able to communicate public interest data, collect public interest data, and circulate public interest data. The framework for leadership that can best make that happen, his name is Al Bartel. That's my specialty. That's my commitment. That's my framework. And that's my endeavor as a candidate in the special election for U.S. Senate here in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Al. Hey, Alan Buckley, love to hear what you bring to the table and what special skills that you would like to talk about.
I'm a CPA both, and in that capacity, I do litigation against the government. I see where the abuses are. I see where agencies overstep their power. And as I said, I have a case right now that's actually in the third different case fighting against one particular abuse of power. And so I've drafted a bill called the Balance of Powers Restoration Act to try to reduce the executive branch's power, which has clearly gone beyond what was anticipated by the founding fathers. As a CPA, I have a financial mind. I do tax returns, I prepare them. I understand the tax system inside out. I have an LLM in tax, that's a master's degree. So I understand the tax system. I understand the finances behind the tax system. I understand, I have a very solid knowledge of finance and economics. I'm also passed the CMA exam, which is, anyways, for managerial accountants. And I've got over 30 years experience doing this. So as you'll notice on my website, if you take a look at it, I actually have drafted some bills to help deal with the problems. And I propose solutions to all the major problems with respect to which I don't have bills. I drafted the Financial Sanity Act that actually tries to deal with the problems of Medicare and Social Security in a reasonable manner. I don't think anyone else in this race comes close to doing so. I don't think the major party candidates that won't lower themselves down to participating in these debates will do anything about these problems, but I will. I'll go up there and I've got a bill, like I said, the Financial Sanity Act. It's on my website. I'm going to propose it to become a law and start the debate. We got to fix the financial problems right now. And let me say this, again, unlike anybody in this race, there's a guy, the last name Green, who does have a significant amount of proposals to the major problems. They don't work, but he's got proposals. Mine work. They financially work. They involve cutting spending. They involve a different tax system. Let me say this. I am an independent candidate. Anybody who's a major party candidate, if they were elected, the first thing they're going to be told is you're going to toe the line or you're going to get no power whatsoever. And they're not going to get anything done unless they toe the line. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Derek Grayson, what's special skills, special things that you would bring as Georgia's next U.S. Senator?
Well, first, I want to say to Alan, you're dead wrong about me. We talk about the candidates here being told not having power. If I'm elected as senator, the power belongs to the people. No one in Washington, D.C. can give me anything because that power rests in the hands of the constituents. Secondly, sir, I bring nothing special to the table. There's nothing particularly special about me. However, my Bible teaches me that one who studies shows himself approved. And the second part of that is, and who does not reject God's truth. Likewise, I study the Constitution and I understand its truths. Therefore, because I understand those truths, I know that 95% of our solutions are already written down in the Constitution. They just aren't being followed. But the 5% that remains where the problem is, that's activist judges, the establishment Republicans, establishment Democrats, and that have been nothing but regime change puppets for the last 20 to 30 years that have done everything that their handlers have wanted them to do. People like to call me Reverend Grayson, but I say just Derek or minister. And the word minister simply means to serve. So I don't want to go to Washington, D.C. to lead anyone. The only thing I want to go to Washington, D.C. to do is to serve the people of Georgia, because that is where the power rests. And with that power, exposing the corruption, no matter where it lies on either side of the aisle, and this will go for all 49 other states. When people see corruption and they know the names behind it, they tend to do something different because you have done something and given them something that nobody else is willing to give them except their leadership talents. That is the truth. and the knowledge of what is actually taking place in Washington, D.C. And that is where our problems lie. And I have said before, we have a politician problem. And that is what needs to be fixed. And we can start by electing Derek Grayson, who will go and serve, because the power rests with the people.
Thank you, Derek. And yeah, you're next up. So, Richard Dean Winfield, you're up next on what you bring to the table when it comes to this.
Well, I'm the one philosopher for Senate, the gadfly for truth. I've been spending 40 years investigating truth and justice in philosophical writings that are to be found in a score of books in all the research libraries of the world. And I've tried to then apply them to the world we face and immerse myself in the facts and develop concrete proposals, which I put before the public when I ran for the House of Representatives 2 years ago, and which I put before the public this year in a book called Democracy Unchained, which I'm putting before the public in a podcast called America Unchained. And what I'm attempting to do with lifelong determination is to change political discourse in this country and move people to not just think hard about what is just and where we should go, but to think about the definite proposals that we need to follow. And I'm formulating that in a whole system of a job guarantee social rights agenda, which I'm determined to put before the public and bring to the Senate. And I'm not going to be preaching to the choir. I'm not going to be pandering to anyone. I'm here to make politics have real substance. I think we all know that there are too many politicians, particularly those so-called marquee figures who are grabbing all the money and press attention, who have nothing to say about what they're going to be doing when they get in office. They instead tell us stories about who they are, their identity, how much money they've raised, how many endorsements they have. But we have to instead focus on the real solutions, and now is the time to bring them into fruition, bring them before the public, and realize and enforce the social rights that our republic has ignored. The time is now. I ask the public to look at my campaign website, winfieldforsenate.com, to read my book, Democracy Unchained, to listen to my podcast, America Unchained.
I know we're running a little over here. I know, Richard, you haven't asked a question yet. So, Richard, and we're going to try to go quickly with everyone's answers. So we can, but Richard Dean Winfield, your question to your fellow candidates, sir.
Okay, I'd like to ask you all the following. I think we all know that before the pandemic hit, rents and housing prices were rising faster than inflation and income. Now, this month in July, 32% of Americans, that is over 100 million people, are unable to pay their rent and mortgage payments, and they are facing homelessness on a scale we have never encountered because evictions and foreclosures are suddenly going to be gearing up. What do you propose as a solution to this vast housing crisis that is racing towards us like an avalanche?
Annette Davis Jackson, I know you had some thoughts earlier. I'd love to hear more thoughts on Richard's question in reference to some of the challenges that we're seeing with housing.
You know what? I tell you, we should all be on TV because I have certainly enjoyed everybody. I tell you, what I do believe that we should do regarding the foreclosures, first of all, from the federal level, from HUD, there's supposed to be a moratorium on mortgages. There's supposed to be forbearances where you can take 6 months forbearances. I think you get 2 if you need it. So that's a year. So with the forbearance, you're able to put whatever that you were owed on the back of the mortgage. So I do believe that that's fair so that everybody can get their finances together because it's very hard. And then the banks are making so much money off of securitization that it's amazing. So we need to get to the regulatory agencies and find out, even the FBI, what is the FBI doing to stomp out these attorneys who are going into the magistrate courts of this nation and deposing, putting a writ of possession on homeowners that in which they don't even own their properties. What I mean is the person who they're suing is not the actual owner of the note. And so it gets a little bit more detailed, but more importantly, what we need to do is they go into what is considered the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, MERS. It's a digital system. But MERS is not a official corporation of Georgia. So how is it that your mortgage is getting assigned over to a digital company called MERS, and that securitizes your mortgage, and that lets investors get into a pool? It makes no sense. With our Social Security numbers, where our Social Security number is a bond, we need to do something about all of that, because we're not in debt to anybody. The United States is in debt to its citizens. And so its citizens need to understand that they have to take the rights that they have as Americans. And we have to fight this thing with regulatory agencies to stop people from foreclosing on our homes, because the security not together, the mortgage is void. So I have more to say about that, because I have people Georgia.
Thank you, Annette. Alan Buckley, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this story that Richard mentioned, that you had 32% of Americans who were unable to meet their full, and they may have met it throughout the month, but able to meet their full rent or mortgage on July 1st.
Well, if you read through the CARES Act and the subsequent legislation, the only problem that a lot of people experienced was unemployment benefits came late, because states were in charge of unemployment benefits, as they always have been. And the CARES Act basically said, you give X amount to the people, and we'll, your ordinary benefits, and we'll throw on all sorts of other federal benefits, including $600 per week onto the state benefits. Well, if you include those benefits and you look at the Paycheck Protection Program, et cetera, at least through the end of July, people should have either basically the money they were making beforehand, either more or less. And a lot of young people are making a lot more than they were making, because they're getting the extra $600 a week. That ends at the end of July, but it'll likely be extended. As far as any sort of rent that is federally subsidized, if the housing unit is federally subsidized, there's up to a 5-month moratorium where people don't have to pay. Later, they can be evicted. But again, a lot of people are making more now than they were before. The benefits will likely be extended. As far as federal-backed mortgages, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which is most of the mortgages, as Annette said, you get a 6-month free pass, and then another 6 months, which is very easy to get, and the payments are added to the back of the loan. That wasn't in the initial CARES legislation. But my point is, a lot of this is being handled, and it looks a lot worse than it is, because a lot of the unemployment benefits came much later than anticipated, because the states weren't ready for it. Yes, some additional legislation is going to be necessary after July, but the CARES Act needs to be, as amended, needs to be modified so people aren't making more than they were making, and they have to have incentive to go back to work once it's safe to go back to work. So
thank you, Alan. John Fortune, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the challenges that some of them are facing when it comes to meeting their mortgage or meeting their rent obligations.
Thank you. Myself and my fellow Green Party candidates here in Georgia have, first of all, proposed the income support solutions I described previously, where workers will get up to 90% of their prior wages and salaries from a government payment until this pandemic can be safely and medically resolved. And that does need to transition morally, it needs to transition into universal basic income. But if there is no such income support coming in, we are indeed facing a total housing and homelessness crisis on top of the existing housing and homelessness crisis. And our solutions include creating a federal database of vacant residential properties controlled by owners or managers who can manage more than one unit. That includes me. I'm a property manager. And yes, I should be in this database if I have more than 2 units and I have vacant properties. And this database needs to be made available to local governments so that the homeless can be housed. And better yet, it'd be better if people were able to stay in their current housing. And so we are proposing the suspension of eviction of families and individuals due to job loss and illness.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
you.
John. Thank you so much, John. Again, I'm trying to wrap up here. Derek Grayson, your thoughts on what Richard was talking about, some of the challenges that some Americans are facing when it comes to making their mortgage and making their rent.
So, of course, mortgages and rent are separate, need to be handled separately, because if I own a apartment building and people can't pay me their rent, but my family is dependent upon the income from that, I shouldn't be forced to rent to them and they are not paying me. So that's where an issue could come. So my thing is, we bailed out General Motors. What did they do? Got on their feet, closed down dealerships, started sourcing their parts from over in Germany. Didn't really care much about the people, but that was the government that did that. We bailed out Wall Street, when the banks were failing because of the mortgage crisis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I have no problem whatsoever. Whereas I saw a bunch of libertarians having a problem with the money that we were getting from the Fed at 0% interest. It's just, more debt on top of the debt we already got. So, big deal. So you tell these banks with these mortgages, you put what they can't make at the back end of their mortgages. Because if the government can bail out General Motors, they can tell these banks that we bailed out that this is what you need to do for these people with mortgages who can't get back to work. And why should the government do that? Because it's the government that shut down businesses that's keeping them from going to work in the first place. And I know they say they got a good reason for doing it. Well, when you've got a reason for doing something, with that reason comes a responsibility to your citizens, since you're trying to protect them, and you therefore don't want to make them homeless. As far as people who are renting, the money that they're sending, provide proof of who your landlord is and let those payments go directly to those landlords that have these people in those homes, versus sending the money directly to the individuals or telling the landlords, well, you can't evict anybody for X number of days because of the pandemic. Well, landlords have families too. So that would be my approach to dealing with the situation on the mortgages. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ryan Slowinski, your thoughts on this whole conversation about mortgage and making your mortgage and making your rent.
You hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, obviously, a lot of hurting going on right now. And I think the fair way to do it is as Annette and Mr. Buckley and Mr. Grayson said, through the use of forbearances on the end of the notes. That way, they're taking responsibility for their current situation, but they're also fighting back and paying it back. I think that would be probably one of the best ways to do it, because, like Mr. Grayson said, the banks, we bailed out the banks. Least they can do is put it at the end of the note, And I think something like that would be fair to the people who are paying the mortgages. And I think that would be better for the country to put everybody on a stronger financial basis until the economy opens up again and we have more jobs flowing in this country. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, see,
Thank you, Brian.
that's some senators talking, right? I wish we could all be senators. I wish we could all be senators because, you know,
Yeah.
we can cover the state of Georgia.
Hey, Annette, let me, we do have one more. We haven't heard from Al yet. And real quick, Brian, I have a question that I put in the public chat to you if you want to look at that question.
Yes, sir.
Al Bartel, we'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the challenges that, whether it's here in Georgia or across the country, when it comes to mortgages and people making their mortgages and their rents.
Sure, with people making their mortgages and their rents, there's no scarcity of resources. What there is a scarcity of commitment. The public-private partnerships in Georgia, the public-private partnerships in the Southeast region of America, and the public-private partnerships in America are fully prepared and have the resources to impact people's capacity to pay rent and mortgages. Local governments can pull together public-private partnership stakeholders. State government can pull together public-private partnership stakeholders, and federal governments can pull together and convene public-private partnerships for stakeholders to impact rent and mortgage payments in America. There's no shortage of resources, just a scarcity of commitment. And that kind of leadership is what those of us who are on this call in particular can provide if we're elected as U.S. senators here in the state of Georgia.
Thank you so much, Al. Folks, the final question, and we're going to make it real quick, you know, because I know we've gone quite a bit over. Brian Slawinski tells me that it's going to be a quick yes or no question for everybody. Brian, your question to everybody. We'll do a kind of a rapid fire to finish this up.
Okay, it's two questions actually. One's yes or no, and the other one's a number. Okay, yes or no? Should we be involved like in foreign wars like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen? And that's the first question. The other is how many military bases should we have?
I'll just go right from the top. Al Bartel, should we be involved in foreign entanglements, and how many military bases should we have in the United States?
We absolutely should be involved in foreign entanglement. It is our duty as a democratic sovereign to do that. We are fully prepared to do that, both with military and the intelligence. We should have approximately 150 bases around the United States of America.
John Fortune, your thoughts on the number of military bases, foreign entanglements, and the number of military bases?
Since World War II, we have been in many unnecessary foreign entanglements, and we should only be fighting fascism instead of promoting it with our military around the world. The Green Party is a party of peace, and I'm against almost all the wars that the U.S. has been in my lifetime. And in terms of our military bases, I say we need to close all 800 plus foreign bases and just protect America domestically. Those foreign soldiers can be retrained in Green New Deal, new energy solutions.
Derek Grayson, should we be involved in foreign entanglements, and how many bases do we need?
So I have to qualify my answer on foreign entanglements. If the foreign entanglement involved regime change and undeclared wars, the answer is absolutely not. We should only engage in foreign entanglements with our allies as it relates to our national security as well as that of our allies that we have valid treaties with. Military bases, as many as are necessary for the security of our country and our allies.
Foreign entanglements and the number of bases do you believe that the United States needs?
there shouldn't be an absolute prohibition on foreign entanglements, but looking back since World War II, Korea was overall a mistake. It's understandable how we got into that one. Vietnam, a mistake. Iraq, a mistake. Much more negatives than positives out of these things. No other country in the world has been involved in as many foreign entanglements as we have since World War II. It's insane. And the only reason we should be involved in a foreign country's affairs if it's necessary to protect the people, the property, and the environment of the people of the United States of America. Number of bases, we have over 800. The rest of the world combined, the last time I checked, had about 60. That also is insanity. If I'm a senator, I would make it my goal to try to cut it down to less than half that number. We've got to move on to the next phase. We had the Cold War that ended when the Soviet Union collapsed. And now we've sort of dominated the rest of the world since then. And we're looking for the next phase of what the world's going to be like. China is trying to overtake us in every which way possible. And the South China Sea is a matter we got to deal with and figure out what are we going to do there, because they're going to try to overtake that just as we would with respect to the Caribbean if they were number one and we were number two. Thank you.
Richard Dean Winfield, your thoughts on foreign entanglements and the number of bases you believe we need.
Yeah, I mean, according to our own military, the greatest security threat to the United States is global warming. And I think we have to make reducing global warming an anchor, an axis of our foreign policy, and seek as broad alliances as possible. And we should get involved internationally to deal with this challenge and all of the socioeconomic turmoil it's going to be bringing in, as well as all the political turmoil. And I think we want to avoid entanglements where we're not serving the cause of freedom, where we don't have a reasonable exit strategy, and we don't have sufficient allies. But we don't want to simply retreat behind our borders and operate in an isolationist way. We have an obligation to come to the aid of peoples when they are being oppressed, if it's feasible to do so. Regime change is another matter, because you can't establish institutions of freedom until the people themselves take the major role in erecting them. It can't be done from without. So I think we have to be wary of foreign entanglements, but not be isolationist. And on those terms, we have to think about reducing our foreign bases accordingly. We certainly have far too many than we need right now.
And wait, did I get to Annette Davis Jackson?
No, you did not.
Did. Larry, we're going to wrap up with Annette. Annette, we would love to hear your thoughts.
Nice. As far as foreign entanglements, no, sir. Not under any circumstances, because I do believe that and I think countries are trying, if they could take over America tomorrow, they would. However, America is so sovereign, so no foreign entanglements at all. I mean, at all, because it means our national security. It means the future freedom of our children's children, and we have to protect our children's children. And what was the second piece of that?
Number of military bases you believe that our nation needs.
And the number of military, I'm with Derek Grayson, as many as we need, because let me tell you, one thing about our military is so strong. I love the military, but more importantly, our missionaries are so important, because our missionaries normally went in and help protect as well with our military. So I think that we need to increase our missionaries. And I did a proposal, and I never got an answer to the White House, but I believe that we should have ambassadors specifically to the United States, within the United States, for every single state, to develop our infrastructure, find out what states are doing and how states are working with cities and, with municipalities, and how they're working with counties, because we often don't talk until a crisis, and we need to do better than that. So no foreign entanglements, and we need to learn as the United States of America how to work together.
So we have gone 20 minutes over. I appreciate everybody's patience, all the candidates' patience, everybody who's been watching. I'm just going to wrap with one quick thought based on something Derek Grayson said. Derek said he doesn't bring anything particularly special. I have done this for more than 20 years, and I do believe that any person who puts themselves forward for office
It's
is
special. That's
And
right.
So I leave you with that one thought. Brian, any final words before we wrap up here?
I just want to say thank you to all the candidates. I appreciate it. I'll be sending you an email for next week. I want to get your input on possibly getting in further depth on one issue per forum or debate, so we can get more in depth and learn from each other and do what's best for our country. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Raul Bali for being our moderator tonight. And
Thank you.
it's appreciated. And good
Thank
night.
you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you
Have
all.
a good night. Have a good night. All
Thank
right.
you.
Much success to everyone. Bye.
Good night. Good night, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Brian, for making this possible.
Welcome.
Thank you, Brian.